All right, well, let's get started. Thanks everyone for attending today. This is our first webinar in a three-part webinar series. We're going to cover really the whole full suite of the things you'll need to conduct a job search. So we're going to kick things off today with how to optimize your supply chain resume and LinkedIn profile. On May the 11th, we'll have part 2 in this series that'll cover how to put together a job search strategy, as well as both online and in-person networking. Hopefully more in-person networking is to come now that we're kind of pulling through the pandemic. And then on May 25th, we're going to wrap things up with interviewing and offer negotiation. So that's the third part. And we're looking forward to having you on, hopefully for all three of these webinars. So this is Supply Chain Careers. We're going to get into an introduction. This is a new company that we launched about 2 weeks ago. So this is our very first webinar. It will be the first of many. I'm going to give a quick introduction. I'm going to pass it over to my partner, Hinesh Patel, and then we'll get into a quick overview of Supply Chain Careers and how we help supply chain professionals, students, veterans, and employers. And then we're going to get started with the meat of the content. So for today's agenda, like I said, we'll have a quick intro. We want to cover just a quick overview of the two companies and how we work together and partner. Then we'll get into how do you optimize your resume, and we're gearing this towards those that work in supply chain, as well as those that aspire to work in the field of supply chain. And then we'll get into LinkedIn profile optimization, and we're going to wrap up with a Q&A. I'm sure you've used Zoom by now. Through the pandemic, it's been one of the top tools. So if you do have any questions, feel free to submit those through the platform. We'll review those as they come in, and at the very end, we'll have a Q&A so we can go through your questions. All right, so we'll get started. So a quick overview of my background. Rodney Apple, I'm the founder of SCM Talent Group, and I'm co-founder of Supply Chain Careers. My background is strictly in recruitment. I've been recruiting for over 25 years. The last 2 decades have been focused strictly in end-to-end supply chain management. And half of that time I spent in corporate America with some companies that you'll know, starting out with the Home Depot. About 2 decades ago, I was brought in to lead the recruitment for the build out of their very first supply chain department. So tackled that project, VP of supply chain, and 12 people under that person, and then went on to lead all of the recruitment at the professional and executive level across their 80 distribution centers at the time and their corporate office, transportation, import, export, and so forth. From there, I went to the Coca-Cola company down the street and was out of their headquarters, led the recruitment for their 22 factories in North America, and eventually took on the entire supply chain for North America, as well as the global supply chain teams. That included sourcing, procurement, kept the 22 factories, all the planning cycles, demand, supply, production, and so forth, logistics, transportation, warehousing, global quality, continuous improvement, and some other things they threw my way. After about almost 7 years there, went over to Kimberly-Clark, healthcare CPG, same thing there, and then wrapped up my corporate career with Cummins. Went into the automotive industrial sector, and then after that, about 10 years ago, we started SCM Talent Group, and basically have been doing that ever since. We mainly focus with manufacturers, retail, wholesale distributors, as well as service providers, everything from your staff level position all the way up to the C-suite. We cover mainly roles across the United States as well. So that's my background. I'm going to pass it over to Hinesh to give an overview of his background.
Yeah, thank you, Rodney. Great overview. And by the way, every time I hear your background, I'm amazed, even though I know you well. So anyway, Hinesh Patel. I am co-founder of Supply Chain Careers and also a senior partner in SCM Talent. My background kind of has 2 or 3 phases in it. The first phase, if you think of it, is much more hands-on operational. I'm an engineer by training, so actually worked in product development, product launch, manufacturing, led plants, as well as led operating units. So kind of hands-on. A lot of that was at was at Honeywell and at Eaton Corporation. And eventually I made a transition into more of the strategy and M&A and executive leadership side. Um, Continued to move up. I was in the corporate strategy group over at Honeywell. Also led M&A and strategy for Hillenbrand, where we took it from a $700-800 million spin-off IPO onto the New York Stock Exchange to about $2 billion mainly through acquisitions. Today it's a little over $3 billion, and it's done quite well. And then I made a shift over into recruitment. Aegon Zender, 8 years. Aegon Zender, for those of you not familiar with them, they're one of the top 2 or 3 executive recruitment and talent firms in the world, based out of Switzerland. I joined them in Chicago, 8-year run there. Did a number of exciting things. That was a pretty fun time. Good people. Got to work at the very senior end of things. Led supply chain for the U.S. Also recruitment, as well as operations recruitment, and then I also led an industry practice, chemicals and process industry. So a lot of board, CEO, CFO, operating presidents, those types of roles. Heads of supply chains, all of those types of roles. So, and at that point, I got kind of back to the entrepreneurial bug and said, hey, I'd love to have some autonomy. Rodney and I teamed up, and here we focus a lot primarily on all things in the integrated supply chain. And it allows me to leverage my experience kind of with hands-on operations in the business, and then some of the executive recruitment I have, which complements nicely what Rodney brings to the table.
Thank you, Hanesh. And as you can imagine, between the two of us, we have looked at who knows how many thousands of resumes. So I think we've got a pretty good perspective. You know, Hanesh mainly at that senior executive level. I've done plenty of executive searches as well, but have worked throughout the supply chain, really all aspects of it across most industries as well. So through that, you know, we're hoping to give you some really good advice on how to craft a resume and how to give your LinkedIn profile tune up so it generates optimal results. So quick overview of Supply Chain Careers. Again, it's brand new. We have been working on this very hard through the pandemic. That was my big project, and we're very excited to bring it to the world. We feel like there is a gap out there as it relates to kind of the soft skills within the supply chain profession. What do the career paths look like? We know they're very deep, they're very broad, very diverse. And so we kind of, serve to help people out in terms of students, professionals, veterans, really everybody working in supply chain, and then those that are seeking careers or transitioning into supply chain. And then in tandem with that, we're aiming to help employers as it relates to, attracting, improving their ability to attract, hire, develop, and retain talent. We launched as part of phase 1 with a podcast. So we've got the Supply Chain Careers podcast. If you subscribe to podcast, you can get them on any of the podcast players from Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Pandora, and so forth. There's not a primary job board in supply chain, and so we're aiming to be that, to offer that service. So we've got the Supply Chain Careers job board, and then we've got a very rich content hub that we launched with lots of articles that we've written, and we've got some guest posts as well. So if you go to supplychaincareers.com, you can check it out, and we've got big plans for phase 2, phase 3. So we are just getting started. And then as far as SCM Talent Group goes, I'll let Hanesh kind of speak to the entity there, and then we'll get started with the meat of the presentation.
Yeah, so SCM Talent Group. So our focus really here is all things operational, up to and including P&L president, chief supply chain officer, chief operating officer, and all of the roles that you would expect fit into that. So we're national in scope. We do end-to-end supply chain. So that, just the general topics that you would guess fit into that, the logistics, you can see them listed here: procurement, manufacturing, operations, continuous improvement, quality, inventory, S&OP, ops, all of those things fit into it. And We work from kind of the individual professional level up through the C-suite. And the idea here is to develop a lot of functional expertise in the overall functional excellence of supply chain, but also the sub-disciplines. So when someone says, procurement versus purchasing versus supplier manager, we inherently understand the differences. So that's the level of touch we like to bring to it. And so that's kind of the differentiating feature, or one of the different features that we have. And glad to be working with our expanded team here, which is located in multiple areas in the U.S. So we are national.
All right, thanks, Anesh. Well, if you'd like to connect with Supply Chain Careers, we are launched our social media platform. So we're on LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and then YouTube as well. So if you're active on these platforms, please give us a follow, subscribe, or like, and we will be pushing out content through all of these different channels going forward. A lot of exciting content planned for both the near future and long term. So we look forward to helping you out through every phase of your career, whether you're launching a career, you're trying to advance to the next level, trying to get into that C-suite yourself, or you're looking to transition out of one area, one function, one industry to another. We're happy to help you whenever that help is needed. So please do connect with us. So going to get started on resume optimization, and then we'll get into the LinkedIn profile optimization. And before we get started, really, when you kick off a job search, you certainly don't want to get the cart out in front of the horse, as they say. So it's critical to spend some time making sure you've got your resume fully updated and optimized, because it is a marketing document, and you want to make sure you've got these marketing documents fine-tuned so they can generate response, ultimately lead to interviews. And then after that, everything kind of leads down the trail of targeting the right companies and putting in the right amount of effort. You can't just post the job and wait for things to come to you. You've got to do a lot more than that today to find the right opportunities. So, Anesh, you want to take us through the kind of the goals of a resume?
Yeah, sure. So, guys listening, if you think about a resume and just step back for a moment, what is the goal of the resume? Well, really, ultimately, it can't get you a job, but it can help you get a job interview, right? So if we look at that, that's why you see that in bold red font there, land the job interview. That's one of the primary, you could argue the primary function of a resume. So if you work backwards from that end goal, what can you use it for? Well, really, you started as a marketing tool. It is your introduction in many cases, maybe in most cases, to a prospective employer, right? Whether it's through a recruiter, whether it's through a database, eventually it lands on the desk of the person hiring or the HR person screening it. You want it to summarize effectively your experiences, your education, what you have to offer. You want it also to make a positive impression. Just like when we speak, people get an impression of us. Similarly, when you write and you pull together a LinkedIn profile or a resume, it communicates how you write and how organized you are. And then finally, one thing you might want to do is consider how to convey your unique value. What is relevant about you and what is significant to the employer that's looking at it? So how do I communicate that value effectively? And we're going to go through some of the details on this, but these are the things that you want to be thinking about as you're developing the goal and the overall strategy of how your resume, and in parallel how your LinkedIn profile might be targeted. It should be effective for inbound as well as outbound marketing of yourself. So inbound is you post your job on you post your resume on a database, or you have given it to a recruiter and they have it and they may come to you. That's inbound. So it has to be effective for that, but it also has to be effective for outbound. This is when you make the push yourself to an employer or a recruiter and you're applying for a job, or you're out there pushing for a job. That's push and pull. And some people have various versions of resumes, and we can get into that at another time. But think about it from push and pull. How is this going to help you land a job interview?
Very good. So would love to cover some of the resume mistakes. I have seen plenty of them. I still see them to this day, and I try to course correct as many as I can for in my shoes before they get to the employer. But a common mistake I see is inadequate contact information. We were just working on a search for a president, pretty senior executive level role, and this individual did not have a phone number on the resume. So, the client's calling us after we send it over. Hey, I want to do a phone interview. How do I get a hold of this individual? So I know it sounds very basic, but make sure you have adequate contact information. What does that look like? Well, clearly you want to have a phone number on there, and you want to have an email address at a bare minimum. I would even go as far as saying, avoid using work numbers. If you're about to leave the job, if you've got your resume out there, or at least that's your intentions, right? So I've seen people list their work email and work phone number, and those are going to go away the moment you step outside of that employer. So bear that in mind. Honestly, I think it's a good idea with Google Voice. It's a free phone number. If you truly want to separate things and have a job specific email and a job specific phone number, I think that's a good idea. I know a lot of people get busy. They don't check voicemails that frequently, or their emails inboxes get flooded. So sometimes it makes sense to keep it separated. The older school objective statement is kind of gone out the door. It's being replaced with more of a professional summary at the very top. It's okay to kind of state, what you aspire to do in terms of your goals as it relates to the types of roles that you're applying to. This is something that is very customizable around the type of position. If you're open to different functions, for example, I'd like to work in transportation, but I'm open to working in warehousing or procurement. You can certainly change this and make sure it's in alignment with the types of roles that you're applying to. So keep it fluid, keep it dynamic, if you will, and feel free to rotate that around the positions. And make sure you leverage and incorporate, kind of the essence of who you are and what you bring to the table in terms of your value proposition. If you've got some expertise in certain areas that align with the position, you want to tailor it, because obviously, the way the human mind or the human eye works, it's going to start at the very top, at the left, and go right and go down. And it's also going to be focused on things that are, and I'll get into this in a minute when we talk about formatting, but you want to make sure that that statement up top is one of the first things they read. It really shines. Lacking supply chain context and keywords. For example, let you say you manage a distribution center. You want to make sure you're conveying that the right level, and there's so much ambiguity out there. That's why it's helpful for employers and recruiters to add context. So what do I mean by that? I give an example of managing a facility. Well, maybe the number of employees is important. Are you the senior most leader? Because sometimes the title doesn't reflect that. You could be a manager managing the plant. You could be a vice president, a director. Titles vary from company to company. So if you're applying for a senior most facility leader, you want to make sure that you add that all important context from an operational perspective. Again, if it's the number of production lines in that facility, the volume, things, the throughput, you want to put that kind of information in there so it tells the story. Because if you leave it out, recruiters are going to have a big question mark. Is this person managing that facility? Is it even comparable to the type of role that I'm looking to fill from a what I call size, scope, and complexity perspective? So make sure you add in the context. We're going to talk a lot about keywords. You want to kind of err on the side of using the most popular keywords that are known in the marketplace that describe what you do. I see some companies that use, these crazy titles. And maybe they do that to keep us recruiters away. So it makes it more challenging for us to find their employees. I'm not really sure, but if you have some kind of an abstract title, you might want to put in parentheses, here's the real title in the marketplace. There's nothing wrong with putting things in parentheses to help add that context. I see a lot of folks using graphics and photos of themselves, charts, and other forms of graphics. You want to be careful there. I think there can be you can build a case to use it. I think in an in-person interview, or if you're emailing your resume to someone, it's okay to use graphics. You got to be extremely careful though when you're applying online, whether it's through an employer, whether it's through a job board, because it's being digitally parsed. So they're using technology to scan your resume, and they're looking for common things that exist in a resume. Again, starting from the top, bottom, your name, your contact information. It's going to pull in all of your different jobs by employer and the dates and all that. So you want to be extremely careful overdoing it with graphics, photos, charts, and things like that, because it will throw off the applicant tracking system. I have seen what comes through on the other end as a recruiter, and sometimes it's not even recognized. You can't even tell. It just comes out all jumbled. So be very careful there with the use of graphics. Poor formatting. This is a big thing. You just have to remember that resumes, at the end of the day, it's a marketing document. It is not a tell-all document. So if you're not using bold, if you're not using underline, if you're not using white space, so you're trying to cram everything in, it makes it very difficult to read. And today, people are very busy. It's kind of rare, and don't take this the wrong way. It is kind of rare though that anyone reads a resume word for word. That might happen when we get to the final, crop, if you will, of candidates that we want to take a serious look at. But for all the applicants coming in, we're just trying to cut through as quickly as we can and find the ones that best align with the position. So you can think of it as a yes pot. This is how I do it. I've always done it, and I think most people do it this way too. Who are the clear yeses? Who are the clear nos? And then maybe who are the maybes? And you're going to prioritize. Here's the yeses. If these don't work out, I might go down and look at some of the maybes, and then the nos are clearly the ones you're not going to look at further. So it's very, very important to use the proper formatting. If you've got big stacks of paragraphs are difficult to scan. Bullet points are easy to scan. So just bear that in mind, and we'll get into some of that here in a bit. Using uncommon acronyms, corporate speak, jargon, buzzwords, that the resume is really not the place for that. You want to, really mitigate using acronyms unless it is a very, very common name. You could argue a WMS, warehouse management system, is something that most people in supply chain know of. TMS for transportation management system, things like that. So just use your judgment there. And if you're in doubt, it's best to spell it out. Including personal information. Again, I see people use their headshots. I know in certain countries it's normal to do that, but in the United States it's not. You really don't want to give the employer or recruiter any information to rule you out. There is a degree of bias in the workforce, and you want to try to eliminate that. So you're showcasing your skills, experience, accomplishments, and you're not embedding any personal information, whether it's your hobbies, your religion, your marriage status, your age, ethnicity, things like that. Just leave that stuff out. It's not, the resume is not a place for that information. You want to make sure it passes the easy to scan test. I talked about that. We're going to get into that further as it relates to proper formatting. If you can't look at it within about 10, 20 seconds and quickly tell what somebody does, it's not passing the test. And it will likely lead into that no category, at best maybe category. So make sure it is easy to scan. And again, you got to use the right formatting to make it easy to scan. Talked about work email, work phone numbers. Make sure you're using personal. A lot of folks think the resume is a tell-all document. Ooh, I've got to list out every single job and every responsibility, every accomplishment that I've ever had for every employer throughout my working career. And I'm going to include my academic as well. I have seen resumes in the 15 to 20 pages throughout my career. I've seen them 10 pages. I've seen them 5 pages. And honestly, 2 pages. 2 pages is really the max. Maybe if you're a senior executive, you could argue for 3, but I would argue that you should be able uh, to to showcase the most relevant experience and your accomplishments, and that should be able to get you in the door if you do it properly. So 2 pages, 3 pages max. 1 page is sufficient in a lot of cases as well. But what you want to refrain from is making it a tell-all document. And then just typos. I see a lot of typos and grammar mistakes. The most common one I see is misspelling manager and using manger. So you want to double check that. And guess what? Spell check does not pick up when you misspell manger. I wish Microsoft would fix that. It's been going on for many years. Anyway, you want to have a second set of eyes look at it. You can stare at it as many times as you like, but there's nothing substitutes having 2 or 3 people look at it to check for spelling and grammar. Emphasizing job duties only. I see so many people just describing what they do. They basically copy the job description and paste it into their resume. That is a huge no-no. If you, whether you work in supply chain or not, it's all about what did you do for that employer in the form of value. So you want to make sure your resume integrates or embeds accomplishments as you describe your duties. And if you can quantify those, even better, especially in supply chain where there's a lot of data, a lot of numbers, KPIs. You want to speak to that value and ideally quantify the results of your accomplishments. Using a one-size-fits-all resume, it's okay in certain situations. If you are a specialist, let's say you work in transportation and specifically rail, probably get by with 1 resume. If you've got a broad background and you're open to 2 or 3 different, types of jobs, you're going to want to tailor that. So, sometimes the one-size-fits-all doesn't work, and it doesn't perform as well as tailoring that resume around the types of jobs that you're applying to. We talked about stacks of paragraphs. That is about the worst mistake you can make. So again, bullet points, action-oriented bullet points are the way to go. And then lastly, just unprofessional, putting something unprofessional in your resume. I've seen people, with crazy email addresses, say for example, jackdanielslover@gmail.com. You want to refrain, from putting in there that's going to cause the employer to kind of, have a question mark on your judgment. So those are the common mistakes. There's 3 types of resumes as it relates to the format. I'm going to briefly speak to the 3, and then I'm going to focus on the one that is most preferred by recruiters and employers. So you've got a resume that is called the functional resume. And basically it's going to, like it sounds like, right, it's going to focus more on describing your experience. And you may have things like, again, using the examples from before, here's my transportation experience and what I've done in this area. Here's my warehousing. Here's my analytics. Here's the systems I've worked with. And you kind of emphasize that experience and you de-emphasize the employment. Now you might be thinking, well, why would I use that type of resume? Well, let's say you've made some mistakes along your career, or you've had to move from position to position, where you might come across as someone that job hops. And so job hopping, today it's a little more common to see people move a little bit frequently. You've got the gig economy going on, lots of mergers, lots of acquisitions, lots of disruptions, companies going out of business. And there's super high demand in supply chain. So it's easy to get lured away. So this is a case where you may want to showcase your functional experience and then and de-emphasize, and try to mitigate the appearance of moving from job to job. Another one is the chronological, and specifically it's reverse chronological, but that's the one that you see the most often, and it's the most preferred. It's got it focuses on your experiences, looking at the employers you've worked for, the jobs you've held, obviously incorporating the responsibilities and accomplishments. And then there's a hybrid model. I kind of like the hybrid model. and this could also come in handy when let's say you're looking to move from one area of the supply chain into another. You're looking to make a pivot. So you haven't really worked in transportation. Most of your background is in, let's say, in procurement, but you've got some transferable skills. Well, you might want to put those transferable skills front and center. So you're going to highlight and emphasize those. But you also want to have your list of experience, and you might put that on the back of the resume at the bottom, therefore, de-emphasize that. So those are the three different formats that we're most accustomed to seeing. I'm going to focus on the one that employers prefer the most, which is the chronological resume. We talked about the contact information. Make sure you have your full name. I see some people put their initials. You really want to have your name. Why? Well, if your resume is sitting in a database, and let's say I come across you on LinkedIn, or I want to try to find you in our system, if you don't spell out your name, I'm not going to be able to find you. So I don't know why people do that, but make sure you put your name, your full name. A lot of people have a question mark on the address. You have privacy things going on these days. You have stalkers, crazy people out there. You really don't need to include your street address, but I do think it's important to list out at least your city, state, and your zip code. Now, if you're coming out of school, or if you're wide open to relocation, you could kind of make an argument that you don't want to be tied down to any one place. You'll have to use your best judgment there. The way the applicant tracking systems work, though, when they parse your resume digitally, they're going to be looking for that zip code, and then the city and the state. And if I'm a recruiter looking for somebody locally, and I want to try to find somebody, and I'm in a big city like Atlanta, where I used to live, a lot of people don't want to cross over and commute from one side to the other. So, a lot of times you'll search by zip code, and if you don't have your zip code in there, you are invisible to me. So just bear that in mind. If you're in Atlanta, or you're trying to apply there, you're probably going to want to have an Atlanta zip code. That way you can be found in a search. So that's why it's important to list that information. And let's say you're open to 2 or 3 cities. Let's say maybe you have a friend in each of those cities. It's okay to borrow their address, because it's better to have some kind of a city and zip code than to not have one. And again, unless you're wide open to the United States, you want to put something in there. Obviously, we talked about personal email, personal phone number. Ideally, your cell phone is best. If you've got your LinkedIn profile updated, and you really should these days, you want to put that URL up there as well. Some other things you may want to include if you have a blog. Let's say you're a college student where you're getting ready to graduate. You've got a current address. You may have a future place you want to live. So in some cases, I know that's how I did it in school. Many years ago, I had both my student address and as well as my permanent address. So it's okay to have 2 in that type of a situation. There's a copy of my resume. I had it professionally rewritten years ago. Really big fan of this format. It's easy to scan. It checks that box. It kind of showcases what I'm about in terms of supply chain search, talent acquisition. I've got a skills summary in there. It's not a bullet format, but I've got some vertical lines in there to separate those skills, and it makes it easy to scan. And then I've bolded, underline things so you can quickly get through it. But you want to make sure you've got the skills, and when it comes to keywords, you're using the most popular keywords. We'll talk about how do you figure that out. What are the most searched keywords? What do people use to describe what I do for a living? There are research tools out there to help you with that. Make sure you deliver, you showcase that all important value that you've delivered for your employer. You want to back those up with quantified accomplishments or metrics. And then, fill it in with associations. Obviously, I'm a member of ASCM, formerly APICS, CSCMP, ISM, and some other associations. So make sure you list those out as well, especially if you have certifications. I will tell you, it is quite common for employers to prefer certain certifications that align with the kind of role they're looking to fill. And us recruiters, we search on those very frequently. So if you have them, make sure you list those as well. And then you see, I've kind of got I would call it more of a power branding statement up there at the very top. that's going to get their attention. It's up there at the top. It's in the front. It's bold. I even increased the font size. So feel free to include those kind of power statements, as I like to call them. And now, obviously, if you're customizing around the type of search, you can, for example, the skills and competencies. You can see I've got talent acquisition, retain, search, contingent, sourcing, so forth. You can rearrange and prioritize those skills and competencies around the type of search, around the type of position you're applying to as well. So in some cases, it might even make sense to have, 2 or 3 different resumes that you have where you're adjusting. That way you don't have to make as many adjustments, and you're not. I've seen people have like 15, 20 iterations of their resume. You're coming out of school, it's a different, I'm gonna talk about that. It's different. You're going to want to emphasize that education. So you're showing that employer, hey, I'm going to be wrapping up college here and I'm going to be ready to start my career. And even if you go back and get your master's, secondary education, sometimes you want to pull that back up top. Because if you don't, employers may look and say, oh, wow, this person took a 2 years off. So I think it's always important to showcase education up top. And then when you get that position, then you can pull it down to the bottom of the resume. A lot of folks ask, do I include my GPA? I would say if it's favorable, usually favorable. Some folks will argue 3.0 and above is favorable. So include that if you feel like it would help. Any kind of other certifications, there's things like Lean certified. You've got different flavors of Six Sigma, green belt, yellow belt, black belt, and so forth, master black belt. Any kind of training development awards, you definitely want to showcase that. Coming out of school, super important to have those internships and follow the same recipe here, where you don't just state the job task, put in those accomplishments as well. And when you start an internship, some people don't think about it until they're told where are your accomplishments. So just bear in mind, keep track of those and have those on the forethought versus the back burner, because you don't want to get caught after the fact. Oh shoot, I didn't keep track of my numbers and data, and then you're going to have to kind of estimate things, and that's not a good idea. Any other volunteer things? If you do public speaking, you're part of the Mensa Society, Toastmasters. If you can speak multiple language, you have security clearances if applicable. A lot of government positions, subcontractor roles, aerospace defense are going to require that. Volunteer experience, military experience, especially if it relates to logistics, operations, supply chain. You might even want to highlight that under your experience, especially if you're transitioning out of the military. A lot of those roles are highly transferable coming out of the military, so make sure you showcase that as well. One last tip here is keep it relevant. Employers want to know the value you deliver to your employer. Let's say you've been working 20, 25 plus years. You want to emphasize the last, let's say 5 to 10. You don't want to go back too far in time and have like 20 different bullet points on something you did 25 years ago. It's just no longer relevant. So just keep it relevant, usually the last few years, and then de-emphasize everything else. You might have 1 or 2 bullet points for some jobs you held many years ago, for example. Last, one more point. Honesty is the only policy. I have seen so many people, especially in my corporate days, I've seen people, get pulled out of interviews for stretching things. So you never want to lie. You never want to stretch the truth. Background checks there's plenty of news articles out there where even CEOs have put in some bent the truth around their resume, and it came back and came back to haunt them, and they were let go, and that follows you forever, especially if you're at a very senior role. So those are the core elements of a resume. Back to the context we talked about earlier. If you're especially leading an operation, you want to make sure you kind of put in the basics of the type of operation, lines, employees, throughput, volume, things like that employers and recruiters want to see, so they can tell, are you managing a tiny operation, or it is a very, very large, or is it somewhere in the middle? Help them understand versus, making assumptions. We want to try to mitigate as many assumptions as possible. So those are my tips on the resume. Now, like I said, if you've got some questions, I see we've got several that have come in. We'll get to those at the very end. So now we're going to parlay this into LinkedIn optimization. I think a good litmus test here, how do I know if my resume, I think a lot of people don't know what they don't know. So, let's say you're sending out your resume and you're not getting interviews. That's kind of an indication that, you might have some improvement opportunities. Or let's say you have it up on some different job boards and you're just not getting anything, or you're getting the wrong types of jobs coming in. That's not always your fault, by the way. Some recruiters, just don't know the space that well. But if you're not getting the right activity, it's probably time to make some adjustments. And I would argue the same case with LinkedIn. If you're not getting people reaching out to you, there's always going to be people trying to pitch you to buy something. But if you're not getting inquiries from recruiters and employers, it probably means your profile is sort of hidden, or it's not generating the right amount of buzz, if you will. It's not getting them excited enough to compel them to reach out to you. So we're going to dive right on into LinkedIn, and then we'll move to the Q&A. So I think it's super important to understand how recruiters use LinkedIn. What you're seeing here on the screen is an example of a real search that I conducted. It's probably been a few years ago for one of our main clients. They were looking for a VP of logistics, and we filled the role successfully. That person's actually still in the role today. They wanted somebody with food and beverage experience. You can see here the different filters that we have. So we've got job titles. You can see that I used, it's called Boolean. It's logic using and or not. But it's how us recruiters can run a search, because sometimes company, they might have been open to a director in a larger company. They could have been open to somebody more senior in a smaller company. So I was really trying to capture anybody that worked in a senior leadership role, from director to VP to vice president to SVP to EVP. So you see the job title filter. I put in, you can't see it, it's truncated, but basically I was trying to find somebody that headed up logistics in a food beverage company. You can see I was running a national search there with the United States. There's the location. We can filter by any location, any city, any state. I can even filter by people that are open to relocating to those cities or states. So it's not always a local search. I can filter by skills, transportation, distribution. They were implementing a WMS, which they did. So they wanted somebody that had been through one of those, warehouse management systems and so forth. Companies, we usually at this level put together a target list of companies, and then we'll try to find the people that are doing the same job, whether it's the number one, sometimes it's the number two. So you got Kraft Heinz, that was a company that we were looking at. There's Pepsi, Coca-Cola, and some other companies. I can look at, year of graduation. I can even search by the schools that you attended, the industries. I got food production. I put consumer goods, logistics, and supply chain in this example. And then we can run a keyword search against every single keyword, every word on your LinkedIn profile as well. So that's the basics. And then if you look over to the right there, you can see, I talked about zip code. Some people will put in their LinkedIn profile the United States. Well, if you do that, I'm looking for somebody in a certain area. Guess what? You're going to be invisible to me. I can search for people that are bilingual. If I'm bilingual, I could even, search for other profile languages in case people have their profile written in different languages. If I want to look for people that may have just joined LinkedIn, let's say I've exhausted my search and I want to go look at some fresh folks that may be new on the platform, I can filter by that date. I can filter by years of experience, the years that they've worked at their current company, the years in their current position. Military veterans, if I'm trying to bring in, veterans to the company, I can filter by that. I can search by your name. That's why it's important to use your full last name. Some people just put their initials, and so forth. So there's a lot of filters. This is probably a couple years old. There's a few new filters in there as well. Why do I tell you this? It goes back just to reinforce the critical importance of completing your profile in full. If you don't, you can be completely invisible to recruiters and employers. And if you're not getting the right amount of activity or any activity at all, odds are probably high that you just don't have the right profile, the right keywords, and so forth. So that's a real search. And just wanted to give you an example so you can see, and again, emphasizing why you want to fill everything out. Let's talk about keywords, Anesh.
Yeah, so keywords are really interesting. It's one of the most misunderstood things out there. It's amazing what what you get when you ask candidates or even sometimes companies what keywords are. And it's very simple. You want to make sure that you have the right keywords that enable you to be seen. Okay, so that's the key theory. And you want to make sure they have the right functions, industries, etc. It's not keyword salad. Sometimes people approach this as I'm going to throw in every single keyword I can into my profile and it'll get seen. That's really not the purpose of it. In fact, that can cloud what's seen. So as you think about it, the real purpose of this is to make sure that in LinkedIn you are discoverable by the right people for the right job. That's what you really want. And so stepping back and looking at it, what you want is to see how are you seen. One way to do it is if you're a, let's say you're a warehouse and distribution manager for the Northeast region and you want to become supply chain director or supply chain vice president for half the company. Well, great. Go out there and run a LinkedIn search for such a profile. If your company was doing it or your target company was doing it, how would they do a search? Yeah, you can run such a search. You go in there and run it and see who pops up. Why do they pop up? Look at their backgrounds. Look what keywords they have. What keywords did you use? So that's one way to do it, and that kind of helps you think through your own language that you have in your profile. What are you using? Another way to do it is to read up on search engine optimization. So think of LinkedIn as one app, but overarching all that is Google, right? Google does searches, and sometimes people will literally search in Google versus going into LinkedIn, and that's fine too. People do that all the time when they're looking for candidates. You want to know how the search engine is viewing you, and there are many good articles out there on it. And you don't have to be a PhD in it. You can learn a bit about it and improve your ability to engineer your LinkedIn profile tremendously. There's a keyword planning tool, in fact, in Google that you can use to help you see what happens. So run a Google search just like you run a LinkedIn search on yourself, um, and see what pops up. The right types of people popping up, and run searches until you get comfortable that the type of job that you're seeking, the type of company, the type of industry that you're seeking, those are the ones that are popping up, because that's what you want to benchmark then, and go to those individuals and look at them. Also, Google does those things on the side, those related searches. Take a look at those too, because sometimes they may give you some ideas of why are these other things popping up. This all helps you give a richer understanding, makes you more visible as you adjust to fit what is seen by the search engine and by LinkedIn. Again, they're related, but they're not the same. One is Microsoft and one is Google. Um, you want to also avoid unusual terms. You want to use standard industry terms. So one of the things, I saw on one resume, they were part of the Thunder Team Award. I don't know what that is. It sounds really good, but what does that mean? It's much better to use terms that are industry standard. And if you're not sure what they are, go to Apex or go to ASCM or one of these large industry associations and look up what is the industry standard term, or just think about it from the perspective of, if you're staying in industry, what would most companies in an industry call that role, that function, that industry segment? And so you can use that. Um, and because I work with a lot of mid to senior level executives and boards and so forth, one thing I will say is, as you move up, depending on what place you are in your evolution as a supply chain professional, you can be coming out of school, you can be aspiring soon to be chief supply chain officer or president. They will be looking at different keywords to evaluate that. Early on, it's much more functional, much more technical. As you get to mid-career, it becomes much more about managing teams and managing multiple functions. And as you get very senior, the keywords they're looking for are much different. They're about strategic orientation. It's about collaboration and influence. It's about these leadership competencies. And you can do a quick search on leadership competencies versus team management and global versus geographic scopes that are smaller. So think about it as an evolution. Where do you fall, and how can you highlight the elements of your career and your experiences in keywords that are easily findable, easily parsable by these two main engines, Google as well as LinkedIn.
Great point, Sanesh. So let's take a look at LinkedIn profile here. I've been on LinkedIn since they came out. I'll remember I was at the Home Depot. So LinkedIn's coming up on a 20-year anniversary, I think. So it's come a long way from the very beginning. But going back to what I said earlier, the first thing people see is going to be your headshot. They're going to see your headline, and they're going to see the background image. So you want to make sure LinkedIn comes with a very bland background image. You can put anything up there you want. Obviously you want to keep it career focused. I see people doing these inspirational things. You can interject your personality a little bit here. I've written enough content to write a book, and so I'm excited. It's been a long time in the making. I'm in the editing phases. I paused it to work on this new supply chain careers business. Now that we've got the website up, I'm back to the book, and I'm planning on getting that out here hopefully over the summer. So sometime in 2021. So I wanted to highlight that. The professional headline, it goes next to your name. Everybody's going to see it. You get 120 characters. Make it count. Make sure people can look at it and instantly tell what you're about, what you're into. A good format is maybe you don't want to put your job title. I see people making the mistake. LinkedIn will put that up there if you don't do anything else. So kind of put position type, maybe a little bit of something about yourself, and then any additional information here. I just started podcasting at the Supply Chain Careers Podcast. I've been an author and a speaker, so I wanted to showcase those things that I like to do and where I can add value. Example could be, I'm in transformation is hot these days. I work in supply chain transformation. The next part of that could be I'm in consumer products, if you want to put your industry that you've been in, and then it may be something else. I'm good with systems, so you can integrate that in there. But it should capture the essence of who you are, what you're about, and the areas you're aspiring, how you help people too. I see a lot of people putting in how they help employers or companies be more successful. So use your imagination and feel free to experiment. Feel free to rotate it out. It doesn't have to be something that's static. Change it out and maybe see what kind of results you get. You want to have a summary. Again, avoid those big, long stacks of paragraphs. You might see well, how did you get that to bold? How did you get those symbols? If you want to go out there and Google Unicode, it's UNICODE. They've got translators, so it has different types of fonts, different kinds of bold, different kinds of symbols, and it can really, really help make your profile pop. So I've got up at the top, how do I help supply chain organizations? That's kind of my bread and butter of what I've done most of my career in terms of recruitment and talent consulting. And then just an overview of my summary of my experience. There's the Home Depot Coke, Kimberly Clark Cummins, kind of filled over 1,000 roles, just really showing that, I've done things from chief supply chain officer on down. Look at these keywords. There's a bunch of them. Those are a lot of the more popular keywords. I'm kind of showing that I've recruited across the entire end-to-end supply chain, very deep, very broad. So I've got those words in there, not just logistics, transportation, warehousing, fulfillment. Again, these are some of the more popular terms that you see in supply chain. And then there's that Unicode. I got a little symbol. Co-host of the new Supply Chain Careers Podcast. So these are just some additional things I've been doing over the years, serving as the career coach for APICS, things like that to really help advance careers for supply chain professionals. Look at the pictures at the bottom. You can add, whether it's a URL or an attachment, you can add rich media. And it really helps to draw the eyeballs. People will look at those things. There's a brochure for what we've done from an executive search perspective. There's a video that we put in that talks about who's supply chain, how do we do things, why are we different. So feel free to use rich media. There's an awesome tool called Canva that can really help you create these kind of images. And then from there, just continue to fill it out. Make sure you incorporate all of your key positions. You don't need every position, but definitely the most relevant. Your summary. Again, you could put more rich media there, and make sure you detail that out. For each position, you get 2,000 characters. You don't want to load it up too much, but make sure you get the right keywords and you're showcasing that value. Education, make sure you complete that. I've run searches before. People that I know have degrees that didn't put it on there. Again, you're going to be invisible if I'm looking for a degree. And then make sure you try to get those skills and endorsements. You could put those in there yourself. And then people that can vouch for you can come in and do and put their stamp as well. And then lastly, it's always nice to have recommendations. I recommend that you use the tool to push those out and then follow up with an email or phone call, because not everybody's active on LinkedIn. Complete all the sections. If you've written anything, you've been featured in an article or a video, you can add those in there like I've done here with publications. I've featured 12 my organizations, and then I've got projects that I've worked on, companies, groups, schools, even influencers that I like to follow. And if you're job searching, LinkedIn's got this pretty cool little feature where you can toggle that to on, and then you can list out the types of roles, industries, locations. It basically signals to those that use the LinkedIn Recruiter platform that you're open, and kind of prompts us to reach out, lets us know you're open to other opportunities. If you need some professional help, we have an awesome resume writer. I've been using him for years exclusively. He's got a background in logistics, supply chain recruitment like myself, and then he turned into a career coach, resume writer. Shoot me a note there, rodney.apple@scmtalent.com. I can put you in touch with him. We don't get anything out of this. We're just happy to refer people, so they can get some help if they're not able to. Not everybody's a good writer. I'm not the greatest resume writer, but if somebody can do it for you, it can be a wonderful investment if it helps to generate more opportunities and interviews. I've also got that resume template. If you liked it, I'm happy to share a Word document with you. And so if you want the template, shoot me a note and I'll get that over to you. So we're gonna get into some Q&A. Brian, I know we've got a few minutes. We can go over. And if we weren't able to get to your questions, and if you've got a hard stop, feel free to just shoot us a note, info@supplychaincareers.com. That's info@supplychaincareers.com. So if we don't get to your questions today, shoot a note over and we will get to them by the end of this week.
Yeah, so we actually got some good questions. One was asked, if you live in a smaller town but near a big city, is it okay to list the bigger city and zip code on your resume? For example, I live in a small town that is within 40 miles of New York City. Should I list New York City?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Usually when I'm searching New York with the incredible train system there and transportation, I usually search the broader metro area. There could be other people that are searching for folks that are specific to, like, Long Island, for example. Some people don't want to go to Long Island. So I think it comes down to the individual. If you're open to opportunities in the broader New York City, downtown area, then I would do that. If you cannot commute and you need to stay in your little small suburb, then you probably want to refrain from doing that.
There's another one asked that, is it appropriate for certifications to be listed after your last name on LinkedIn?
Yeah, you got to be careful with that. Because if I'm looking for somebody, if I'm searching for you and your name, and you've got, CLTD or CPIM, that might show up as your last name. I think LinkedIn has a workaround though. If you put a comma, so put your first name, last name, and then a comma, and then the certification. I do see people doing that all the time, and I do think it helps to stand out. But you can also put it in your headline. Everybody's going to read the headline. I know I do. I'm not saying everybody does, but I usually look at everybody's headline because it's right there in front of you in the very top. So you can do it. I would just err on the side of use your use some judgment. You may want to go back in and look for yourself and see if you can find yourself. If you can't, you may want to drop it down into the headline.
Gotcha. This is coming from a recent graduate or someone that graduates soon. Final exams are next week. Graduating with a master's in logistics and supply chain. I have internship experience. Do you have any suggestions that should be must used on my resume for pursuing a supply chain analyst or planner? I'm looking in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people will go to school, undergrad, they'll get out. Hanesh, if I recall, you did that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then you're going to re-enter the workforce. So like I said earlier, I think it's very important to convey to that employer that, hey, I went back and got my advanced education. And so I think that's the case where you want to bring it up into, emphasize it up top. And then below that, I think, relevant internships, you want to list those out as well. You could, there's no right or wrong here. You could make an argument that you would put the internship, you bring it back up to the top of your professional experience. Just make it very, very clear and put the word intern or internship, and that you went to school, put the dates that you went to school. Because if you drop that stuff down to the bottom and then employers see that you took 2 years off, you just want to mitigate assumptions and bias. And then if you're looking for, analyst type of a role, the most important things there, data analytics. So you want to make sure you incorporate those keywords that you and experience that you picked up in your internships, and add those to the experience summary. Integrate them into the internship responsibilities, obviously put in the accomplishments, quantify the results if possible. So that would be my recommendation. And then as soon as you get your next job after you get your advanced degree, then you can move it back down to the bottom. Whether you keep the internships or not, it's probably not quite as relevant once you re-enter. Would you agree with that, Hanesh?
Yeah, I agree. The full-time work experience is the most important, and what you want to do is showcase as much of the full-time experience with the right magnifying glass on the skills that are relevant for what you're looking for. So if you're just graduating, it's perfectly relevant. It's perfectly fine to have intern experience for now.
And another one was asked. This person's looking to shift or advance their career from a career in sustainability to more of a focus in supply chain. Do you have any tips, or do you have any tips for this person?
Yeah. I've always had those in my corporate days. I always have the sustainability, environmental health, safety type of roles, and they tend to fall in many corporations, especially manufacturing. They oftentimes will fall up under the supply chain or operations umbrella. And so if you're inside of a company, it's a little easier, right? You're going to probably have relationships because a lot of folks that produce the waste is going to come out of supply chain, in particular, manufacturing. So if you're looking inward, obviously build relationships with those folks, make them aware, make your boss aware, make your HR partner aware. You want to figure out training, learning opportunities, things like that you might have available to you, mentorship. I'd have a mentor in supply chain that can help open up doors in supply chain, but also help you from a, coaching and mentoring perspective, right? And then if you're looking externally, it's a little more challenging. It's always challenging no matter what, to shift over into a brand new function. And so, you got to think about things from, if I'm applying to a new position, there's a couple of angles I would look at. It's always easier to go from the same function to the same function, right? That's the path of least resistance. So sometimes you might want to look at another big organization where maybe I'm going to take a sideways step here. These guys are just hiring in supply chain like crazy. If I can at least get my foot in the door, because oftentimes it's about getting the foot in the door. So it's easier to transition function inside of a company, and then externally, it's always a more of a challenge. Now, if you've got relevant skills though, and transferable skills, you want to bring those up to the top of the resume, just like we talked about. De-emphasize, the non-relevant skills that are not transferable at all. You clearly want to network with people. It's going to come down to networking too. You can network with fellow sustainability people in the companies you're targeting as a means to get a foot in the door. But it can be a challenge, and it can take a lot of effort to make a change like that's a pretty big shift, sustainability. And obviously I call sustainability thing, same thing with supply chain or operations, finance, HR, IT. You guys are the supporting cast. You're critical to the success of supporting those functions. So think of it that way, and networking and reaching out to people. It is challenging though, but the best way to do it is networking and then showcasing those transferable skill sets, and then have a plan B. Like, they're not allowing me to progress at my current employer. I've got to have an exit strategy. My plan B is if I can't make that transition into a new employer, I'm willing to go into sustainability. Maybe it's a company that's growing at a faster clip. Maybe you can find out that they're very progressive with their talent development and management philosophy, and they allow people to make moves and stretch assignments. Some companies are more conservative and they like to keep people in their little sandboxes. Others, on purpose, will try to broaden out their skills based on their career goals. So you want to find the companies that are a little bit more flexible and not as rigid with their requirements. Hanesh, anything to add there?
I would only add, I think everything you said is correct, and I would only add that one other leverage point might be where industries and companies where sustainability might be what I call operationalized sustainability. So oil and gas, chemicals, battery, with the explosion of batteries, a lot of those will have sustainability roles that are actually quasi-operational, which could make you kind of do the half jump, or where you're actually tied into operations, and the sustainability is part of, okay, what do we do with the wastewater from the lithium battery manufacturing, those kinds of things that are, and so now you can legitimately claim to be in operations and or supply chain. So that's another way to kind of look and increase your odds.
I think we have time for maybe one more.
Okay. And before you get started, Brian, I'm just going to flip to the next slide just to make sure people are aware. As I mentioned in the beginning, we've got part 2 coming up. If you'd like to sign up, just head over to supplychaincareers.com/webinars. You can sign up for the next one on May 11th at 2 Eastern, or the third one, which is on May 25th. So head on over there if you'd like to participate in the next round. So let's get that last question, Brian. And then if anyone has any additional questions, shoot us a note, info@supplychaincareers.com.
Yes, so one was asked, is there any good way to gain recommendations and references on my LinkedIn profile?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people make the mistake of using the tool inside of LinkedIn to ask for recommendation. You want to go above and beyond that. So before I even use that tool, what I like to do, what I did in the past, I would simply just touch base, whether it's through email or a phone call, and I would tee up that recommendation. Usually, if you have a great relationship with someone, they were a past manager, you didn't burn any bridges, for example, they're usually going to do it for you. And don't give up though. Let's say they tell you they're going to do it. Sometimes people get busy, they forget. So follow up. Don't stalk. Don't be too hit them like 3 times in a day or a week. But follow up 2 or 3 times, and until they're like, most of the time they're gonna be like, oh shoot, I forgot. So just don't be afraid to remind someone. Just make sure you do it without overstepping the boundaries and to where you're being a nuisance. But definitely follow up, and I like to get I call it permission based, the permission based ask. Hey, I really could use some recommendations. I thought of you. We had a great working relationships over at this company. And here's some, maybe even tee up, here's some of the things that I think would look really good if you would want to, just to jog their memory, especially if it was a leader that had hundreds or even thousands of reports. You want to make sure you jog the memory. So have a few bullet points that you can refresh their memory. They're like, oh yeah, I remember that. John did an amazing job standing up this new facility, and whatever else might be relevant to the types of jobs you're applying to.
I think we're all good then.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Sorry we went a few minutes over. Appreciate you hanging out. Again, info@supplychaincareers.com. And while you're on the website too, register for these other webinars if you like. We look forward to hopefully having you back on for round 2 and round 3. And lastly, if you want to stay up to date on all the different types of advice that we're pushing out, as well as content, again, we're just getting started. Head over to Supply Chain Careers, and there's plenty of sign up buttons right there. Sign up will get you on our list, and then you'll start getting updates and notifications whenever we have future webinars and new content to put out. So again, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.